also known as Obsessive Costuming Dude, author of the Star Trek Costume Guide. And I have with me here an original screen-used TNG Season 1 Admiral jacket. If you read my costume analysis, you know they actually changed a little bit over the course of the show, and this is the very first one. The first time we saw these in the show on Admiral Jameson in the episode Too Short a Season. You know, the one where the old guy takes the magic potion from the Fountain of Youth and gets younger over the course of the episode and then dies, right? So that episode. If you haven't read my costume analysis, you can check it out on my blog, the Star Trek Costume Guide. That's www.startrekcostumeguide.com. It's also available as a free PDF download. But I've been studying this costume, and I've documented it pretty extensively on the blog, and I wanted to give you a video tour of it while I was at it. And I have a special treat for those of you who stick around to the end of the video. Before we get started, I want to thank Angelo Cafaldi for letting me examine this costume, making this video possible, and allowing me to share my research with you here and on the blog. So let's take a look at this thing. I went ahead and took it off the mannequin so you can see it better. The first thing I'll show you is the fabric. It is, of course, jumbo spandex. William Ware Tice sure seemed to love his jumbo spandex, at least for TNG. So you can see it's cut with the weave going in this direction, but this particular spandex is actually four-way stretch. Not two-way. So it actually has some stretch this way. You can really tell across the back. It doesn't stretch as much this way as it does up and down, but it does have some horizontal stretch to it, which is nice. And I did my best to color match the red division color. Didn't find anything perfect, but the closest thread color that I found was Coates & Clark, number 3090, 3090. Camera doesn't want to focus on it. Whatever. Zoom in. There it goes. So Coates & Clark, 3090. Called Red Plum. Red Plum. Red Plum. Red Plum. So that's how it looks. It's not perfect, but it's pretty close. It's not quite dark enough, really, but it's about right. Just to give you an idea, because this fabric isn't red, it's actually kind of purplish to it. It's definitely more of a berry color. So it's kind of like this color, but it's a little darker. And I don't have a Pantone book, at least not yet, so kind of did the next best thing, and I went to Lowe's, grabbed a bunch of paint chips, and the closest I found was Valspar number 10107, called Berry Brown. It's hard to tell because of all the gloss on here. Again, not perfect, but it's the best I was able to find. Yeah, look at the gloss. Sucks. Depends on the light. Sometimes it looks way too red. Sometimes it looks perfect, and sometimes it looks too, like, orange. It's the closest that I found, anyway. See how it looks close up. Whatever. Again, not perfect, but it looks okay in person. So that's Valspar 1010-7 or 1010-7, and Coates & Clark number 3090 red plum for the color. And for the trim, actually two different trims on this thing. You can see this gold trim going around the neckline, and then down the front. This is actually pretty close to just regular old standard retail trim. Grab some here just from my local Joann. It's a simplicity, just off the shelf trim. Here's the article number, and you probably know it when you see it, but there it is, 1890466. Just regular old retail trim. 1/4 inch wide, or wait, it says 5/16. So 1/4 inch, 5/16, whatever. Here's how they look right next to each other. The color's not quite right. This is, you know, shinier. But I don't know if the original maybe looked like this and it's just faded with time because it's been, you know, over 30 years, or if it still looks the same. But the overall design of the trim, it's basically the same stuff. And this neckline trim, and down the front, is actually two different trims. The whatever you call this, swirly, flowery, you know, whatever, trim is actually on top of another trim underneath it. It's gold kind of braid stuff. I don't know if you can see it. It's actually hand sewn on from the underside. So you have this trim right here, and then this trim is hand sewn from the underside. So I don't know if it was designed like that or if it's an afterthought, because the trim that's underneath is the same trim that's sewn into the shoulder seams and goes down the sleeves. It's at the bottom of the yoke on both the front and the back, and it's at the bottom of the sleeves. This stuff is actually 2 inches wide, and it's folded in half, and it's just sewn. Well, it's sewn into the hem in this case, but it's usually sewn into the seams with however much poking out the costumers originally wanted. Looks like it was usually about 3/16 of an inch. Sometimes it goes up to 1/4 inch. Just like the piping and the trim on the jumpsuits and the skants. So this trim right here is the same trim that's underneath. So I don't know if maybe the uniform was originally designed with this trim alone, and then you know, maybe Tice decided that he wanted a different trim going around the neckline, so he just you know, had this put on top of it. Or maybe because there are actually little holes in this trim, you can actually see through it in some places. You see? So maybe if the trim was straight on, you know, you can see the colors out from underneath or something, so it was just backed with the gold to make it look more like a solid gold trim. I don't know, but that's how it is. You have this trim, you have this trim underneath. It's actually started to come apart here over time. I don't want to make it worse, so I'm not going to fiddle with it too much, but I'll show you. Right there. See, started to separate where that hand sewing is started to come loose. So that's the trim, and there's this lining around the neckline here, which I assume is to protect either the edge of the trim against fraying, even though it's not done anywhere else. You see, it's sewn right into the back yoke seam right here, or to protect the actor's neck from itching while it's up against this stuff, or both. You can see here's the actor's name tag. The guy who played Admiral Jameson. So the trim runs all the way down the front, and then kind of the same deal here at the lower front left. You have 2 layers. This trim, then the other trim on top of it, probably so it looks, you know, like one continuous thing. And of course, across the bottom here, we have all these pleats all around the front and the back, and a few seam lines. Now, if you remember though, if you read my costume analysis, or you just have a keen eye and you were watching the show, Admiral Jameson's uniform that we're looking at now had these pleats across the front, but Admiral Quinn's didn't. When he showed up in the episode Coming of Age, and then in Conspiracy, along with the other admirals, these pleats at the lower front here were exclusive to Admiral Jameson's jacket. But the other Admiral jackets did have the pleats on the sides and the back. And you can see here that here's the hemline has some stitching. Or it's supposed to be hemmed. Didn't quite get there. So the stitching's visible. Of course, you'd probably never see it in the show. You can barely see it now in person when you're looking for it. Yeah, so it's turned up. The pleats are, they continue onto the underside. We'll take a look at the inside in a minute. So we have these pleats, and then you have a couple side panels on each side. Zoom out. Big ass Velcro patch right here. So I think this was the jacket used for when he beamed down to the planet, and was a trap or something, whatever it was. They ended up getting in a firefight while they were down there. So we got a big patch right here. I think that's probably for the away team gear, because obviously it wasn't there on the other uniforms in the show. And so we have a side front panel. Oh, zoom out even more. So here's the underarm. So we have this panel right here, pleat. And then we have a side back panel. Right here, all the way down with a pleat. And the pleats are not centered, because, I mean, why would they be? Right? I think they may have been at one point, but the side seams were taken in, which kind of threw it off. But again, we'll look at the inside in a minute. Going all the way around, we have all these pleats across the back, which are irregularly placed, because of course they are. William R. Tice. We're talking about William R. Tice here. So they are symmetrical though. Like if you do like the center back, they are symmetrical in that regard. Then going around, we have another side back panel here. That with a pleat, and side front panel. All the way down with a pleat. And then the left front actually extends past the seam right here for an inch plus the trim. It's like 1.25 inches or whatever if you count the trim, but an inch right here, and that's where it meets this, whatever the hell you call this, black panel thing. So of course, any examination of the TNG Season 1 Admiral uniform has to include a look at the infamous brooch. Actually, I thought it was brooch. B-R-O-O-C-H is how it's spelled, but Kate said it's pronounced brooch. And she's smarter than me about that stuff. But brooch is a different word. B-R-O-A-C-H. Like you broach a subject. And they're spelled differently, so why would you pronounce them both the same way when they're spelled differently, mean different things? So anyway, I went to dictionary.com and I was like, how do you pronounce this? And the lady said brooch or brooch. So I was like, thanks. Anyway, so I'm gonna say brooch. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Just to differentiate it from the other word that is spelled differently, it means something different. But if you have an opinion on this, if you have strong feelings about this, leave a comment, make your case, and maybe I'll read it. But you can see here, it's actually sewn on these little holes in the corner. Up here at this end too. So 1, 2, 3, 4 sewn on. And these are actually sewn on in two directions, one going this way and then one going that way, and that way. And look at the texture on this thing too. It's not just flat. There's a lot of texture to it. It's pretty unique. The closure system on this thing is pretty unique too. Classic William R. Tice. So right underneath here there are half a dozen irregularly placed snaps. And then underneath the snaps is a zipper. Above the zipper is a hook and eye closure, right here. No, I already undid it. Looks like that. So we will unzip the zipper. It is a separating zipper, but below it there are two more separating hook and eye closures. There, and then the zipper separates. Don't caught on something. There it goes. So hook and eye closure up top, zipper all the way down, and some snaps outside of the zipper, I guess to hold the trim over the zipper and keep it from wanting to peel back. And reveal the zipper all the way down. The zipper separates, and two hook and eye closures. Now here's the first of many questions I have about this. The seam allowance changes direction. See at the bottom it's sewn in going under like you'd normally think it would, but up top poking out this way. It just changes. It just changes its mind halfway through. But I wonder, because you could just turn this under like that and everything fits. You still get your hook and eye closure. Everything fits on the underside. You just tack it under and it would be fine, and the seam allowance would stay in the same direction. But it wasn't, and I don't see any evidence that this was ever tacked down and it's come up over time or anything. It just is. I mean, maybe it was intended to be that way, because you can see it's kind of cut to that shape so that it wouldn't poke out from the neckline. So maybe it was just done in a rush, and you know, they were like, screw it, I'm not gonna take the time to tack that down. There are other more important things to do. But it looks to me like it should have been tacked down, but wasn't for some reason. Right? So that's that. The inside of this thing is just crazy. When you start, you got these big ass shoulder pads up here. I thought the shoulder pads were big on that scant that I examined, but these are bigger than even those. And they have more loft to them too. Those scant shoulder pads were pretty thin, but these have some serious loft. You know, I'd say at least, I don't know, maybe half an inch. Maybe more. I don't know. So I don't know if the men's were always bigger and thicker than the women's, or if this particular actor just had really sloped shoulders and needed it. But there they are. Definitely a product of the 80s, and it only gets crazier from there. Let me zoom in. So I already showed you the lining around the neckline, which is hand sewn to the yoke. It's formed kind of like a little facing kind of a thing. But the center front, 6 inches or so, has some lining. I don't know if it's to stabilize it, keep it from stretching out, or, well, I don't know. That's the only reason I can think of for it. So about 6 inches. It's just sewn into every seam there. And you can see here, this is the underside of the black panel thing. Here's how that looks. Here's the trim I was telling you about. It's 2 inches wide, folded in half. Zipper is top stitched down through all layers several times. Then the snaps are hand sewn to the underside of the second trim, where it's poking out there. And I already showed you how on this side the seam allowance is changed direction. Well, that's just par for the course for this thing, because I mean just about every damn seam allowance changes direction on this thing. But the neckline lining, it goes around till it gets to a little past the top of the zipper, and it's just, the ends are turned under and it's just hand sewn down. Nothing fancy. Also, the seam allowance expands right here to about 1 inch. Right here where the zipper starts. So you have normal seam allowance around the neck, and then it gets wider right here. So I'm just going to start at the lower right, and we'll just work our way around this thing clockwise because it's just freaking weird. So these seam allowances right here for the front panel thing change direction too. You can see up top at the yoke they were sewn in facing this direction. It looks like they were pressed in that direction, but look, they change down here and they're sewn in that direction. So whatever. They're sewn in here, and you can see the two hook and eye closures there. And the zipper, here's what I was telling you about earlier, how the pleats extended past the hemline. They didn't go all the way to the edge of the fabric. Stopped a little bit shy of it, but they're still pleated into the hem allowance and then let out, which actually works because I don't know if you know your geometry, but this edge will be longer than this one. So, you know, having it let out effectively increases the length of this edge compared to this one. So, I mean, if it would have been pleated all the way to the edge, it would have been too tight. So, it's a pretty cool trick. Anyway, see the hand sewing for the hem. And I meant to mention before, as always with these early TNG era costumes, the dull side of the spandex was used as the right side. The shiny side was the underside. You can see the difference there. The hem allowance being the dull side from the outside, and then the shiny side on the underside. So that first seam allowance changes direction. I think they all do except the side seams. Let's see. So here we have the side front seam line up here, or seam allowance rather, and it's sewn in facing this direction, although I'm not sure if it was supposed to be. It may have just been caught in the stitching, because you see if you actually press this over, it doesn't work. So either it was supposed to be sewn in nice and evenly, nice and pretty, or it was accidentally caught in the stitching when attaching the sleeve, because I'm pretty sure it's not supposed to be like that. So whatever. There it is. And you go down, working your way downward from the yoke. So it's sewn in like that. It looks like it was pressed this way for a while, then it opens back up and was sewn in to the hem open. Then we have the side seam. Both are open. But then the back right seam allowances, something similar happens. They were both sewn in that direction. Nice little foobar right here. And so they're both sewn in and pressed in that direction, but then you get to the bottom and they're hemmed open. I mean, they were, I think they were all hemmed open regardless of which direction the seam allowances were actually pressed or sewn in, just to reduce the bulk or to more evenly distribute it in the hem, because it'd be weird if you had these like bulges in the hem where these seam allowances were. But these seam allowances change too if you look at it. I mean, to start, I'm pretty sure this was taken in at some point, but if you look at this, these seam allowances are huge, but like these are uneven. I mean, look at this. There's different seam allowances here, but they're the same down bottom. Just kind of widen. So like I said, I think they were taken in at some point. You look at the pleats. All these pleats were about a 1/4 of an inch. And oh, I meant to mention on this lower edge, it's not actually a straight line. It's actually a curve. It's kind of interesting. Just looking at it, when someone's wearing it, it kind of looks like a straight line, but it's actually in this kind of curve shape. So anyway, making our way around to the left side. More seam allowance shenanigans. So you see up here, the left back seam was sewn with the seam allowances going in this direction. Another little foobar right here, something got caught in the stitching that shouldn't have been. Working our way down. Once again, they changed direction because they were hemmed open. Like that. We have the side seam. These change direction because up here they're open, and then they change, and they both go in this direction. And then the side front seams, or seam allowances, were just like the right side, sewn in this direction, but then they change towards the bottom. See, they flip over, and they're sewn in under here, like this. So yeah, they all change except for the right side seam allowances. Those stay open the whole time, even though the actual seam allowance changes. Because again, it looks to me like this was taken in after the fact. That's just my theory anyway. So let's look at this little area right here, the lower left front. This is a piece of work right here. So we have this black fabric right here. It's a woven fabric. It's about the weight of like a sateen fabric maybe, but it definitely feels synthetic. And it's just sewn in right here. You can see it's actually sewn onto the side seam allowances. And this edge is a selvage too, presumably to prevent fraying. You can see there's a little bit of fraying across the top. I think its purpose was really to stabilize this area and keep it from stretching, because you remember this is four-way stretch spandex. It has some side-to-side stretch, and Tice, or the people who worked for him, didn't want this lower left front to stretch out of shape, so this woven fabric right here, the black stuff, stabilizes the entire area. And this piece right here is actually a separate piece. It's kind of like a facing piece or whatever. It's not just this turned under, because the trim is sewn into it. So right here you can see the seam line across the bottom, and like I said, the trim is sewn into it. So this is a separate piece, and it's hand sewn to the hem allowance along this edge, and hand sewn to the black fabric along this edge, all with a catch stitch. You can see the stitchings started becoming loose up here. I'm not going to fiddle with it because I don't want to make it worse. And then you have this little piece right here, which is just a separate piece. It's like, it's just a piece of jumbo spandex folded in half and just stuck in between the zipper seam allowance and this thing over the black fabric. And I think what happened was, you know, the front looked like this, and they're like, oh snap, like it gaps open right here or something, and so this was just added like at the last minute as an afterthought or whatever, because maybe the hook and eye closures didn't quite cover it or whatever, but the trim doesn't extend up onto it. And again, everything tells me this was just like a last minute addition, but that's just my theory. That's my theory. I don't know. My brain does not work the way William Ware Tice's brain worked. So, whatever. It could be part of the design, but it was sewn in right here. It's just jumbo spandex folded in half, inserted, sewn onto the zipper seam allowance and hand sewn onto the black fabric, again with the catch stitch. This whole area is stabilized with this. There's this little facing thing, and then this, whatever the hell this is, little insert above there. So this whole area is just, like I said, it's a piece of work. And on both sides there are these little double elastic loops. This one's hand sewn to the black fabric and to this seam allowance, actually anchored on there. And I think this was to fasten the jacket onto the trousers, probably with like a button on the trousers, kind of like you would anchor suspenders, or some people call them braces. You know, you have a little button and then you anchor them on there. So that's what this looks like. And you have two options, you know, presumably for different fitting. You can use this one or this one. See, there's one on this side too, right here, sewn onto these seam allowances to anchor it onto the trousers. Because I mean, this jacket isn't very long. Even with high-waisted trousers, they wouldn't overlap very much. So you gotta anchor that so you don't, you know, get some like you know, belly button action over here between the trousers and the jacket. You want to keep that nice and anchored together. I don't think the overalls style trousers had started happening yet at Star Trek, or in Star Trek at this point. If you look in what do you call it? I think it was Coming of Age. You look at Admiral Quinn's uniform. There's a scene when he's in the turbo lift, and you can clearly see the top of his trousers through the jacket. You can see the top edge of the trousers, and there's no evidence at all of any overalls action going on. But let's move on. Let's look at the sleeves. So here you can see the trim again. This gold trim. And here's what the underside of it looks like. It's like this yellowish, whatever you call it. I wouldn't be surprised if this trim was actually a fabric that was cut into 2-inch strips, like a metallic gold fabric. I mean, it feels kind of like an upholstery fabric, really, with this weird stuff on the back. It doesn't look like it was a pre-cut trim or ribbon or anything, and you can see some very slight fraying around the edges. And of course, when things are cut on the bias, you know, they don't fray as much. So I think this may have been a fabric. You can even see diagonal lines. So if this was a fabric that was bias cut into, you know, 2-inch bias strips and then sewn into the seam, that wouldn't surprise me at all. So that's the sleeve seam. Now check this out. These inner sleeve seam allowances were massive. Oh, I had to grab my seam gauge. Just look at these. That is 1 1/4 inch seam allowance for that sleeve seam on both sides. I mean, just damn, it's huge. Of course, I mean, this side it's the usual, you know, like 1/2 inch or so seam allowance, but I mean, these are huge. They're huge on the other side too. So I don't know what's up with that, unless it was like it was just taken in like a crazy amount, like the sleeves are way too baggy, so they were taken in for that actor. I mean, who knows? But one thing I was surprised about was that the little sleeve inserts were actually just top stitched down. I thought they were more like proper inserts, like sewn with a seam. I'll show you one here, and then I'll show you the other inside out. So here's what the outside looks like. So I thought this was like sewn onto here with a seam, but no, it was actually just top stitched onto the sleeve piece. It was just top stitched down. And then, of course, the hem was turned up and catch stitched. And then here's another place where you can see the full width of the trim, which is machine sewn onto the hem allowance. And then the top edge is hand sewn to the hem allowance. And some things I just don't understand. So, you see it's hemmed with the division color thread right here where you would see through on the side, which is good, that makes sense. But then you look at all of the pleats, they're all sewn with black thread when you're just sewing through the red fabric. And I mean, these things are sewn through like 2 or 3, I think 3 times. They're all sewn with black thread. So if it comes undone, you know, at the tips or whatever, you get these horrible little black threads poking out. So every pleat sewn with black thread. The seams were sewn with black thread. Oh, and one last example of shenanigans with the seam allowances. You can see the shoulder seam allowances were sewn in going this direction. Right? You don't see them on this side, but you can see they're all going that direction. But we go down the sleeve, and they're sewn in the opposite direction. That way. So almost every seam on this thing has seam allowances that are sewn in one way or pressed one way and then change direction by the time they get to the bottom. So I don't know how much of that is intentional. I don't know how much of that is you know, William Ware Tice just, you know, didn't know or didn't care, or I mean somebody didn't care, but it's weird though. Like, why would you do that? I mean, I can understand each individual thing makes sense. You know, hemming it with all of them open, that makes sense. Or sewing them, you know, one direction or the other, that makes sense. Sewing this thing in that direction, that makes sense. But you put it all together, and it doesn't make sense to me anymore. You know, the shoulder seam allowance is going a particular direction, that makes sense. The sleeve seam allowance is going a particular direction, that makes sense. But you know, you add it all together, and you end up with something that just makes no sense to my my analytical mind. That was pretty neat, wasn't it? Hope you enjoyed the video tour, and now, as promised, a special treat. I made a copy of this jacket's pattern, and I patterned it using a technique that I learned in this book, 101 Sewing Secrets from the Singer Reference Library. I'll put a link to it down below for those of you who are interested. It's a cool book with lots of neat little tips and tricks for sewing and stuff. But the pattern that I extrapolated from this jacket, I'm putting on the Star Trek Costume Guide, where you can download it for free. Now, these are large format engineering prints, so unless you have a large format printer, you'll probably have to take it to your local copy and print shop to have it printed, but it's there on the blog for you to check out for free. I haven't decided whether or not I'm going to grade it into all the multiple sizes for a Battle of Costumes pattern, because I don't really know how much interest there is in this. in terms of costuming or cosplaying, rather, in the cosplay community. But maybe, if you're interested in this, leave a comment below, or send me an email or a Facebook message, let me know, and we'll see. Thanks for watching, and subscribe to my channel for more video tours, costume analyses, and sewing tutorials.